I didn't forget to ring the bell, so bonus points for me. So good afternoon and welcome to Rotary Club of Tulsa, club number 2500, District 6110. Thank you for joining us today as we create lasting impact. 250 years ago today at noon in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, the bells in the city rang out, including the famous Liberty Bell. They rang out to summon all the citizens to the State House yard, which is now Independence Hall. There, Colonel John Nixon publicly read the recently adopted Declaration of Independence for the first time to a crowd. The ringing continued well into the evening, and after sunset, residents gathered, lit bonfires, and partied throughout the city. And I'm guessing some of those long-lost descendants of those patriots were up at Grand Lake this last weekend. They were very celebratory and determined to honor the past as they shot off fireworks until well after 2 a.m. I'm not going to be that Karen, but I think we already know I am that Karen. So to begin today's program, Richard Holmes will deliver the invocation, followed by guest introductions from Rob Gardenhire.
Let us pause for a moment of reflection. We give thanks for the opportunity to gather together today in a spirit of service, fellowship, and goodwill. We are grateful for the talents, experiences, and perspectives each members bring to this club, to our community. Bless those we serve who support our efforts and those facing challenges in our community and throughout the world. Inspire us to be instruments of positive change and to leave a lasting impact through service. As we share this meeting together, may we strengthen our friendships, renew our commitment to service, and dedicate ourselves to making a difference in the lives of others. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we got a great crowd today, so Courtney, good job pulling them in. We got a bunch of guest introductions, so if you'll just stand, we'll do everybody at the end. We have a couple of visiting Rotarians, but we're gonna just move on through. So Ben Harmon, welcome. Ben's a guest of an email that got sent to him. Sherry Langston, guest of Jim Ray. Steve Barnes is our visiting Broken Arrow Rotarian, and his guest is Andrew Marshall. Oh, there we go. Hi, Steve. Roger Fisher, guest of David Miller. Ella Bauman, guest of Paul Bauman. Darcy Moran. Joe, I think it's cheaper for her just to join at this point. But Darcy Moran, guest of Joe Moran. Larry Payton. Larry, again, signed up online, so thanks, Larry. Daniel Figueroa, who is the guest of Thomas Kindla, and he is also the son of the late, great Rotarian Pedro Figueroa, so welcome. Denise Dillon, guest of Jerry Dillon, his wife. And then a few guests of mine. So we have a couple of interns with us today through the Bank of America program, Brianna Wentworth and Lily Bradbury, and then my co-worker and partner in crime, Jane Kuckler, all from Habitat for Humanity. So thanks for the guests for being here.
Today, I would like to welcome and recognize Iris Patterson, a Jenks High School student that our club is sponsoring through Rotary Youth Exchange Program. Next year, Iris will spend her junior year in Chile, where she will be hosted by Rotary District 4320. Iris, we wish you every success as you embark on this exciting and life-changing Rotary Exchange experience. Thank you for serving as our club's Rotary Ambassador and for representing our community abroad. We look forward to hearing all about your adventures when you return and share it with us next summer. Please help me in wishing Iris the best on her journey. As I promised threatened, last meeting, over the upcoming weeks, I'm going to share about the officers that are serving you this year. And today I want to visit about Ashley Kutschel, who's serving as our club and vocational service director. I first met Ashley when she joined our club in June of 2019, and I had the opportunity to see her leadership in action while she served on our board of directors as treasurer. Whether delivering financial reports or responding to questions, Ashley always demonstrated confidence, professionalism, and a calm presence. No matter the situation, she handled every challenge with grace and never seemed to be rattled. Over the last year, Ashley and I have enjoyed many conversations about Rotary and the future of our club. What excites me most about Ashley is her enthusiasm for strengthening the connections that make our club so special. She's been a driving force behind bringing back Rotary family events. My voice is changing, I apologize. Bringing back Rotary family events. She and Jenny Hammock were sitting in the audience when Tina and Carl put together the Rotary DNA about the Rotary family picnics. And this year we will be having a family picnic, so stay tuned. She's also been instrumental in reviving the fifth Wednesday meetings for community service and committee meetings that will be held here at the church. You'll be hearing more about the family picnic, which is currently being planned with Jenny Hammock as the chair. Ashley's passion for Rotary, her thoughtful leadership style, her commitment to increasing member and family engagement are just a few of the reasons I asked her to serve in this very important club role. She has assembled a team of dedicated volunteer leaders, and when I call your name, you can stand, including Richard Holmes, Program Volunteers Chair, Rob Gardenhire, Programs Chair, Brenda Melancon and Joe Moore, Rotary Cares Co-Chairs, Johan Tallman, Special Events Chair, and Jenny Hammock, Social Events, Johan is Social Events, and Jenny Hammock is Special Events Chair. Fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce our club Vocational and Service Director, Ashley Kutschel. And I apologize she could not be here today, but let's give her a round of applause, please. And at this time, please welcome our Sergeant at Arms, Kenny Brown.
All right, thank you for that. So I got asked earlier if I was going to wear this suit every week, so unfortunately you do have to see me every week in this yellow suit. But I did wear the jersey to make sure you knew. For those that were not here last week, I'm impersonating Jesse Cole, who started Savannah Bananas. So I have notes because I want to make sure I stay within my time limit. All right. So one of the things that Savannah Bananas ask is, who do we work for? And it's simple, the fans. And I love the business mindset that Jesse brings to his entertainment industry, which a lot of people may think, well, whatever business that you may be in, you are not in the entertainment business, so how does this apply to you? But the really cool thing about the Bananas is they don't lose sight of who the fans are and why they work. So with that, we'll start. Who do we work for? Fans. So one of the things that the Savannah Bananas do is they always ask, is it fun for the fans? So if you've ever been to a game, which fortunately Karen, as a huge fan, let me go to the Kansas City Royals game, and we got to see the Bananas and the Indianapolis Clowns in the Kansas City Major League Baseball Stadium. And so everything they do is it fun? And so if you go to a game, everything from dancing players, fan participation, everything starts with, is it fun for the fans? So really quick, one cool thing that Jesse did at an event is he got the idea, because they do a lot of sales with merchandise, is to give away, partnered with the banana company Dulce, and created underwear that he gave away. And it's not about the underwear, it's about the experience that you tell. You're creating stories for your fans to go tell other people about what they're doing. And so I think it's really cool to be able to do that, that they do that, and then encourage us to consider how we can be innovative and do that with the clients that we serve, or the people that we get to work with. All right, so last week, first up, Karen McCannell. Apparently there was a failure to ring the bell. In true Savannah baseball, every mistake turns into entertainment. So, Karen, we were going to help you with this, with the $25 fine, and because we're classy, we're going to play your entry song. Walk-up song today is Ring My Bell. Come on, let's go. Okay, she's not dancing. Okay, so this is a really cool, we're celebrating, Tim and Barbara Null are celebrating 36 years of marriage. That's impressive, right? Yes, give it a round up. But we've learned the secret to their success is duck lips. The Savannah Band has always looked for crowd engagement, and this may be the most committed fan participation we've seen. Congratulations, Tim and Barbara Null. Great End Yohi, celebrating a birthday, and those are better shared. These are her grandchildren, Lane and Lily. So let's help celebrate her success with, she gave a $100 fine this week, so we'll hold the applause to the end so we can get through this. And next up is Seth Dilster. His anniversary, 4 years. So we're excited to celebrate that. And sorry to see you leave, Seth, but there you are. But excited for the next chapter in your life. And then last but not least, my 2 peas, 1 bunch. I have given $200 to celebrate my birthday, which was last Thursday. And I celebrated in true Sarge fashion and had an ice cream truck to the neighborhood. So that was what we did. But this is my twin sister, and before you ask, we are not identical, for the obvious reasons. All right, so I want to say thank you to everyone and for being such great sports. If you have anybody that you would love to highlight, please email me. I will provide that next week. I didn't provide it this week, but if you appreciate all that you do for our club, again, I'm Sergeant at Arms, raising money for the Rotary Tulsa Foundation. That's the local foundation that goes to help support nonprofits in and around Tulsa. I left my t-shirt, but there are shirts available. I found out some people didn't know we had shirts, but we have shirts. Sure, yeah, if you can bring it up real quick. We're okay on time?
Only for you.
Only for me, thank you. All right, so here they are. They've got a QR code in the back, and they have all the different organizations that have been supported throughout the year. So really cool shirt. Somebody suggested that I do a yellow t-shirt, so it may be forthcoming if we are interested in that. All right, thank you.
Was I the only one that missed the invitation to the ice cream truck in Kinney's neighborhood? You would have thought I would have gotten an invitation, but. At this time, I'm excited to introduce Rob Gardenhire as the Vice President of Development, Green Country Habitat for Humanity, where he leads their development efforts, including fundraising, event management, and donor relations. A Tulsa native, that's very cool, I think Tulsa native. Rob offers a diverse background from his experience in nonprofit fundraising, sales, professional sports, event management, and marketing. Rob has played an integral role in several transformational civic projects, including the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, $10.5 million capital campaign, the Tulsa Drillers 2010 move to One Oak Field in downtown Tulsa, and led the fundraising efforts for the USA BMX headquarters in historic Greenwood District of Tulsa. Rob earned his undergraduate degree from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, went on to obtain his MBA in marketing management from the University of Dallas in Irving, Texas. Rob and his wife, Carrie, returned to Tulsa in 2008, where they raised their two daughters, Emma and Ainsley. And I'm going to add Rob's fun fact, but it's probably my fun fact. But Rob is a member of Leadership Tulsa, Class 48, and at the time I was the Leadership Tulsa Vice President, so that is my unofficial, official adopted class. So please welcome our Rotarian of the Day, Rob Gardenhire.
Holy cow! It could have Rob is here to introduce Courtney. Would have been fine. Thank you, though. Well, excited to have Courtney Cowley here. She serves as the Oklahoma City branch executive and assistant vice president for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. As Oklahoma City branch executive, Cowley is the bank's lead officer and economist in Oklahoma. She recruits and works closely with the Oklahoma City branch board of directors and is responsible for briefing Kansas City Fed President Jeff Schmid, a member of the Federal Open Market Committee, lots of committees here, on economic trends in the state. She also serves as a special advisor on agriculture to Vice Chair for Supervision, Mickey Bowman, at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Cowley, Courtney, holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Oklahoma State University, as well as a master's degree in civil engineering from Colorado State University, go Rams, and a bachelor's degree in biosystems engineering from Oklahoma State University, go Pokes. Help me welcome Courtney to the mic.
Well, thank you, Rob and Karen, just for your warm welcome, and all of you for your hospitality today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am a mom of 9-year-old twins, boy and a girl, and I haven't been asked in a while if they were identical, so I think that that's a good sign. So, but just really I'm not currently a Rotarian. Hope to be one day, but I was involved in Rotary Youth Leadership Awards in high school. I grew up in Ada, Oklahoma, attended Bing High School, and one of the best, I think, leadership experiences I had as a teen was Camp Ryla. And so Rotary holds a very special place in my heart because of that, and just it was really cool to see some of the work that you all are doing to help develop youth. And so kudos to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the economy with you all. And yes, we do have a lot of committees. If you follow the FOMC, the new chair that we have, we're also going to have more task forces coming. And so we won't get into all of that today, but I did bring some cards if you'd ever like to talk just about the new chair or what's going on at the Board of Governors. We can maybe do that offline. But I do want to share a little bit about the Federal Reserve before we get started, just to say our structure is important. We actually, a few weeks ago in June, the House Financial Services Committee has a task force on monetary policy that's chaired by Frank Lucas, a congressman from one of our representatives from Oklahoma. And they actually had a field hearing in Oklahoma City about this very topic, the structure of the Fed and why it's important. So if you're interested in learning more about that, it was a 2-hour hearing, so if you have time, it's posted online. But all of that basically to say, I think what the key point that came out of that, which is what my colleague Sarah Dixon, who's here with me today, who's our public affairs director at the Oklahoma City branch, what she and I often tell groups that we talk to is just that this structure allows Oklahomans to have a link to their central bank. And that's a lot of what was discussed at that hearing. From a monetary policy perspective, that's very important because, as Rob said, I am an advisor for 2 of the members of the FOMC, and for our bank president, Jeff Schmidt, who serves the Kansas City region that's in the middle of the country that includes Oklahoma. He is your representative when they're conducting monetary policy, when they're talking about interest rates, the money supply, the balance sheet. And so it's important for him to know how you all are experiencing the economy. And so that's what we do at the Oklahoma City branch from a monetary policy perspective. But the Federal Reserve also has responsibilities in financial system stability. We move money. We ensure that money gets where it needs to be, whether it's digital currency or physical currency or even checks still. You'll notice that when the government shuts down the Federal Reserve, we keep working because those things cannot take a break. And so that's very important to be spread across the country. We also have an important function in bank supervision and regulation. And we believe that it's important for those bankers in the room to have a choice for who regulates them. And one of those choices is the Federal Reserve. And when you have bank examiners that are based in Oklahoma City that understand banking and the economy here, that relationship seems to work really well from what we see. And so those are just a few of the things that I think are important to highlight when it comes to the Federal Reserve and how we work. And then in the Oklahoma City branch, we're one piece of that. There are about 24 branches across the system, 12 reserve banks, each of them having a bank president and CEO that sits on the Federal Open Market Committee with the 7 members of the Board of Governors. And in Oklahoma City specifically, we're one of the smaller branches. We have about 50 staff. Most of those are bank examiners because they, in Oklahoma, we actually have the largest portfolio of banks of any other state within the Federal Reserve System in terms of banks that we supervise, because we have a lot of small community banks here. In this part of the country, where relationship lending is very important, and so we have a lot of those banks that we supervise. The team that Sarah and I work on focuses on research and outreach, and we also manage all of the surveys. I'll be showing some of our survey data that we collect out of the Oklahoma City branch. And then we have a few other functions as well, including community development and economic education programming. We partner with a lot of organizations throughout the state of Oklahoma when it comes to economic education and financial literacy. And then one of the key aspects of my job is to work with our branch board of directors and recruit new directors. And they really are our key economic advisors and representatives for the state of Oklahoma. You'll notice that there's 2 from Tulsa, Scott Case, president of Case and Associates, and Rebecca Thompson, who's the chief accounting officer for Aon here, and then other directors spread out across the rest of the state as well. So now turning to the economics portion of today, what's going on in the economy. This economy that we have is very interesting because it's been hit with a lot of shocks. Going back to the pandemic, and then, we've seen over the past years, since the pandemic, there have been 2 conflicts, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or now the conflict in Iran that keeps we have ceasefires and memorandums of understanding, and then we go back. There's just been, since the pandemic, I think the key word has been uncertainty in this economy and just a lot of turmoil. But despite all of that, all of those shocks, all of that uncertainty, the economy has been very resilient. And we see that in the GDP data. We saw in Q1 of 2025 a negative reading. But really, if you were to take imports out of that equation, GDP would have grown at about 3%, which would have been historically average in Q1 2025. That was a very interesting time where companies were seeing tariffs on the horizon and importing as much inventory as possible into the country to have that on hand so that it wouldn't be subject to tariffs. And then you see how that played out in the second and third quarter of last year, where we weren't really importing a whole lot because of those tariffs, but we were still exporting. So there's been a bit of volatility, but overall GDP has remained relatively solid coming into this year. On the other hand, though, what's interesting about this chart is that these are the 2 macroeconomic indicators that we tend to look at first at the Fed. what's happening with growth in the economy, with GDP, and then what about on the labor side with employment. So, and these two numbers tend to follow each other. They tend to be very correlated from a historical perspective, meaning that as GDP increases, we tend to see employment increase as well. Well, they became disconnected last year, where we saw strong GDP growth, but employment start to slow. And that gets back, and we'll talk more about why that happened, but gets back to that uncertainty piece, where even despite growth, companies and organizations have been through a lot. When you can't see clearly into the future, it's very difficult to know how much you should be hiring and expanding. Productivity growth has also saw a big bump since the pandemic, so companies are able to do more with less. There's also AI that comes into the equation. So there's just a lot of reasons why we do see this separation, but it's important to note because when it comes to monetary policy, we have two sides of a dual mandate, which is price stability and full employment. And so that's what I'll be focusing most on today when we're talking about the economy, those components of prices and employment. But we start at a high level. And going back to GDP, though, and growth, what's been driving, if I were to break out GDP, I mentioned imports, but really the largest component of growth in the economy in the United States is the consumer. We're a very services and consumer-oriented economy. I think we saw some of that, and when Kenny Brown, you were talking about a fan experience. Like, we do like experiences in this economy, and that really does drive a lot of what we see in GDP, especially since the pandemic when the economy kind of opened back up. But what we have been seeing more recently is this concept of a K-shaped economy. And you may have seen this in different media publications about the economy. And what that means from a consumer perspective is that the highest income earners are contributing the most to overall spending. So the top 10 percentile is spending at a very rapid rate and really outpacing every other income category. Even if you drop down to the next percentile, the high income, 80 to just sub 90%, there's quite a separation there, and it's been increasing. Lower income, low and middle income consumers in that 80th percentile and below are really only increasing consumption and spending alongside inflation. So only as they have to. And whereas post-pandemic, you were seeing that even that category was spending at a faster rate, even above inflation. So that's one thing that we kind of keep an eye on, and we see that even in anecdotes. I was just listening to Marketplace this morning on the radio, and they were talking about the demand for new aircraft. And how much of a backlog there is for airlines getting these new planes. One reason is because they're more fuel efficient, but another reason is actually because of the demand they're seeing for first class and business flyers who want kind of higher amenities, better seats, and so they're trying to reconfigure planes to allow for more of those first class, higher income, higher wealth type passengers. And so not only do we see it in the data, but as a Fed economist, when we're out kind of in the public and kind of listening for those kind of key indicators in the economy through anecdotes, that's something that we also see as well. We're always looking for when the anecdotes match what we see in the data, because this data is backward looking. It's already happened. It's you all, the people that we interact with in Oklahoma, the things that we hear. You guys are our windshield to the economy. You help us see what's coming, and that's why kind of the work that we do in the branches in particular is so important, because we're closer to the actual action that's happening than what they might be kind of in DC. They don't necessarily are as close to what is happening in the economy in Oklahoma. Now, on the business and industry side, we're seeing the same thing, and almost all of it being driven by IT, artificial intelligence, anything in the information processing and related equipment sectors. We hear a lot about the construction of data centers and what that is driving in the economy. I heard a macroeconomist last year ask the question, are we experiencing another round of Dutch disease, where there's so much investment in one particular industry that it actually crowds out investment in other spaces. And so you see pre-pandemic, these were kind of these two data series were more moving together with industrial and other equipment, and since they've really split apart into that kind of K-shaped trajectory. So starting to pick up a little bit on the industrial side at the end of last year, but still very behind the pace of where we've been on the information processing. And so on the latest CPI reading, we have been seeing inflation accelerate, and we would expect to do that. You know, I'm an agricultural economist, but I tend to follow all commodities, including those important to Oklahoma, which are oil and gas. And, you know, when you talk to energy economists, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would have been the doomsday scenario in all of their forecasts. That would have been like tucked away in a drawer somewhere when they think, you know, this is the worst thing that could happen. And it happened. And so we would expect there to be a reaction in the market when it comes to oil and gas prices. And we'll talk more specifically about oil and gas in a minute, but it's important because of how energy affects overall inflation readings that we're seeing. In fact, we know energy prices can be so volatile that we even take it out and talk about core inflation from a policy perspective. But what's more concerning, I would say here, obviously food and energy really jumps out because of what's happened with energy, but it's really the services and shelter that we tend to look at with kind of a more critical eye, because we know that those are components of inflation that are harder to bring back down once they go up. Those are, you know, to the very technical term, stickier inflation, as opposed to the more flexible goods, food, and energy inflation. And so you can see how long it's taken us to even get shelter and services inflation down from where it went post-pandemic. And so to start to see that shelter inflation come up again, and services inflation tick up, that's a little more concerning from a longer term perspective, as oil and gas prices have already come back down to kind of pre-conflict levels. So what else has been, so I mentioned energy prices. We see, you know, that volatility in oil and fuel prices, you know, coming from an ag background. I always kind of zero in on the diesel prices because those can be so important for our supply chains, for our farmers, even for drilling oil and gas. They require a lot of diesel kind of on the rigs as an input. And so fuel prices can be kind of have a lagged effect on inflation in other areas too, if those supply chains have to pass those costs along to customers and consumers. We also know that tariffs are still there, even after the Supreme Court decision. I think every week I see something where the administration is finding another way to implement tariffs. I think now they're targeting countries based on working conditions for workers that could affect up to 99% of the products that we import. So these are important things to consider when thinking about inflationary pressure and what that means for consumers, but also monetary policy. And we know that someone is paying tariffs because we can see the data on customs collected. But I will say that the impacts on inflation have actually been a lot more minimal than we would have expected when the tariffs came out. And I don't have a chart on it today, but we do collect data through our surveys that ask questions about price pass-through. And I would say in our latest survey in June, we asked this question again, and a majority of our respondents in manufacturing and services would say that of any price increases they've experienced due to trade policy, they're only passing through about you know, at max 20%. And so I think the question is, how can they do that for such a long period of time? Well, for a long time last year, they had that inventory that was, you know, pre-tariff that they were able to work through. But then also they have experienced, coming out of the pandemic, much higher profit margins, and no one wants to lose profit margin once you have it, but they do have a little cushion there, a little room. And then there's been a lot of, I think, negotiating and work done along supply chains to kind of distribute those cost pressures between suppliers and end users. So even though we do know that tariffs have an effect ultimately on inflation, it's just this time around has not been as substantial as what we've seen in the past. And another thing that can contribute to inflation or also interacts with inflation is wages. So post-pandemic, we saw a big increase in wages, particularly in Oklahoma. And this is something that definitely also contributes to inflation in services when we see wages increase. And I give the example of food. I'm an ag economist. If you go to the grocery store and buy like your package of groceries, on average, about 40 cents of those groceries was due to costs along the supply chain at some point. So whether that be on the farm or in the processing, packaging, distribution, you are paying 40 cents on the dollar for wages that got that food to you. If you go out to eat at a restaurant, so that's food service, we think of food that we buy that we make ourselves, that's a good. It's a service if we go out to a restaurant, that's in that service component. For every dollar that you spend at a restaurant, closer to 75 to 80 cents of that dollar is from labor, and most of that at that end point, the cooking, the service that you pay. So you're paying a lot more the cost of the products that we buy when it comes to services in wages. And so that's why when we see wage pressure, it tends to be correlated with the services component, and that's why that's a much more difficult component of inflation to bring back, because once wages go up, it's much more difficult to bring them back down. And the good news too in Oklahoma is that our wage increases tend to be keeping up with inflation. So this is real wage growth. This one's been pretty important here recently because in just the latest inflation reading with that last bump following the conflict in Iran, the U.S. average of real wage is back to zero, meaning that wages are across the U.S. on average, wages are only increasing in line with inflation. In Oklahoma, though, our wages, even though they've come down a bit relative to inflation, they're still outpacing inflation by about 1 percentage point. So something to continue to watch if inflation continues to increase, but we're still in better shape than the nation as a whole. Now, should we expect, the University of Michigan does a very well-known, and also the New York Fed, both do very well-known surveys of consumer expectations on inflation and consumer sentiment. And we know that since the pandemic, we've had what the kids call a vibe recession, or a vibe session, where the vibes just fell off, sentiment has been down, but people still continue to spend. Now, whether that's because of the bad vibes or in spite of it, that's less clear, but we do know that consumer sentiment has been down. We also know that in the most recent surveys, consumer inflation expectations have increased. And we expect that to happen whenever gasoline prices go up, because that's a very salient and close product that we all buy very regularly. And so consumer inflation expectations have increased, but then there's a lot of dynamics on whether or not that could be kind of what we might term a self-fulfilling prophecy to then roll into actual inflation. And one of the reasons why it might not is because of what we just talked about with wages. Typically, why inflation expectations are important, just because if you expect higher inflation, you might be more willing to pay those higher prices. But also because if you're expecting inflation to continue or to increase, you might go to your employer and ask for a raise. And so we do tend to sometimes see higher inflation expectations correlated with higher wages. But more recently, why that's not as much of a concern to some economists is because of what's happening in the labor market, where we don't see as much churn in the labor market anymore. And what also explains some of what I showed on the first chart with a slowdown in employment growth. And it's really coming from both sides of the labor equation. We talk about the supply of labor. On the left-hand chart shows labor force participation rates. So that's the percentage of people that are in the population that are in the labor force actively looking for a job. We have seen that drop both in the US on average, but also in Oklahoma. And this is an interesting one because historically in Oklahoma, our labor force participation rate has been lower than that of the nation. But in 2023, it actually rose above that. We saw a big jump in labor force participation rates in Oklahoma, primarily driven by our Native American and tribal areas and economies. For some reason that's fairly difficult to explain, we saw a very large increase in labor force participation rates. It stayed stable above the U.S. Average for a couple years, but now it's since kind of come down at the same time as the U.S. as a whole. And there's a couple of other things that have contributed to that. One, an aging demographic. So we have seen more retirements in the economy post-pandemic. And then also, as the baby boomer generation is still our largest generation by population, and so as they leave the labor force, we expect to see a drop in supply of workers and a decline in labor force participation. The other reason is immigration. And so if you dig into the data by its components, one of the segments of the economy by demographics that has the highest labor force participation rate is actually Hispanics, that demographic. And as we've seen less immigration, we've also seen a drop in labor force participation rates. And so that's the supply side. On the demand side, firms just aren't hiring as many workers either. There's less demand for workers, and that's shown by the hiring rate. This is one that, if you're curious, maybe as you've been experiencing inflation and you're wondering why the FOMC decided to pull back on rates a couple times last year, this was a big one. This decline in hiring rates, lower demand, less churn in the labor market, signaling some risks. And so when we see this lower hiring rates, there's just not as much there's not as much of an ability of an economy to get out of a recession once we get into one, because there's not as many job opportunities available for workers that might lose a job. So this is one that was very concerning to a lot of economists and policymakers, and to me when I see that historically Oklahoma's hiring rates have held above the national average, and then last year they dropped pretty sharply even to below the national average. Now, I will say that on the next slide here, you can see that overall, though, for the nation, because both supply of workers was declining at the same time that demand for those workers was declining, we actually did not see much movement in the unemployment rate for the U.S. I mean, in fact, it even went down slightly because both of those components were moving together. Now, it's a slightly different story in Oklahoma. Post-pandemic, we've had a much lower unemployment rate across the nation. We've had tighter labor markets here than, if you look at the availability of workers looking for a job or the vacancy rates relative to those unemployed looking for a job. We've had a much higher rate there than the U.S. average. It's been about 1.5 vacancies for every unemployed worker. So we've had lower unemployment, tighter labor markets. We really kind of had some wiggle room, if you think about it, in our labor market here. But in the last part of 2025, we did see a fairly rapid increase in unemployment relative to that of the nation, even though our unemployment rate is still below that of the national average. Just something to watch, and this happened as on the job growth side, job growth across the state slowed. Our total job growth in Oklahoma for the year was about minus 0.2%. So relatively even, but you like to see a positive number as opposed to a negative one. But I will note on the chart on the left, the one pocket of real strength across the state has been Tulsa. This northeast Oklahoma portion of the state has been one where we've actually seen some growth over the last year. We've heard a lot and experienced, and our community development staff has spent a lot of time out here with representatives around the Port of Catoosa and some of the tribes and the work that they're doing. So I think that, there is a lot of optimism in this particular portion of the state, even relative to some others, even recognizing that the state as a whole, the economy has been still fairly resilient. So, and then if we break that, job growth out by industry, again, like I said, job growth declined just very slightly, almost remaining even, but what's concerning is that for the U.S., we actually saw still slight growth. And you can see where some of that, the major contributors to some of that growth or decline for the year. And it really was just slower growth in some of the sectors where we've seen stronger growth in the past years that wasn't able to offset decline in other sectors. So healthcare would be an example. Healthcare has been really supporting, for the U.S. as a whole, overall job growth. And so when you see a decline in that, if there aren't other industries to offset it, that can be difficult. Construction was another one where we saw a slowdown, but I do think it's interesting. This was the first month in a long time, May of 2025, where we actually saw positive growth in mining employment. And that was even despite some of the merger and movement announcements that we heard in the state. We did see some growth there. And then looking at some of the other components of inflation, housing or shelter, I was talking to Rob before this, and I made the comment that especially in rural areas, housing really is the basis of an economy. If any roundtables I have in rural parts of the state, that's usually the first thing we talk about is housing. Whether or not they have places for people to live really determines what types of businesses and industries they can move into town or sustain in their towns. And so this is something that we had been hearing a lot about, housing affordability issues across the state. So it's not just availability, but also affordability. And those two things do tend to interact with each other. If we have low supply and high demand, affordability can get out of control fairly quickly. We also had a lot of people moving into the state post-pandemic through domestic migration. And you'll see maps around the internet of this. We got a lot of in-migration from both Texas and California in particular. Growing up in Oklahoma, it was a fairly rare event to see a license plate from any other state other than Oklahoma. And it seems like since the pandemic, the phone number lists I get from my kids' school have area codes I've never seen before. You see a lot more license plates from other states. And those are two kind of signs, at least to me, of the data that we see of all the people moving in. I think we netted about 600,000 people in the state in the time period that I show here from 2018 to 2024. Most of those people moved to metro areas, but we saw almost all counties across the state gain in population. And so you can see the effect that likely how that contributed to some of the housing affordability changes that we saw, because between 2018, 2019 to 2024, if you were living in the greater Tulsa metro area, you could expect when you bought a home for those costs to make up about 10 to 20% of your income. Fast forward only 5 years, there's some counties around Tulsa where you could expect more like a quarter to a third of your income being made up in housing costs. And so that just means that there's trade-offs that have to take place. It's less affordable, you have to save longer, you might not be able to spend money on other things like services or experiences or things like that. So home ownership just became a lot more difficult across the state. And now the latter part of my talk, once we talk about the big pieces, I'll kind of talk about a few more specific subjects and sectors. I do want to note, recognizing that we're in Tulsa, where Route 66 comes through, this being the centennial. We were just in Weatherford last week, where they said that they'd seen this year a bump of about a 60% increase in tax revenues in Weatherford because of the Route 66 centennial, seeing a lot of European tourists in the town for the first time. So I do want to highlight some of the work that our community development staff has done in advance of the centennial on Route 66 and how scenic byways and tourism contribute to economies. And so if you have a chance, I included the QR code. If you're involved in this industry or interested, it's just a really great kind of way to highlight the important impact of Route 66, recognizing that Oklahoma has the largest stretch of any other state in the nation. And I think that it also, gets to the culture of the state as well. I think there's a quote from a gentleman from Clinton that he said, "People have strong opinions here, but at the end of the day, they know that they're going to need each other at some point." So there's a real sense of community. And I think that we've talked, I think, since the Thunder won the championship, Go Thunder, last year, the Oklahoma Standard and what that means. And so this is more, I'm not trying to be a motivational speaker by any means, but with economists getting accused of being the dismal scientists, I feel like putting in a little optimism in the middle is a good thing. And so I did want to highlight some of that work, and just to say, even with some of the challenges that we're facing in the economy, that there is really still a sense of community and this, sense that we can kind of accomplish anything in this state, no matter what's thrown at us. So wanted to cover that. Speaking of community development, we also have we run a community conditions survey. So, it's not always just the macro thing. I am much more of a microeconomist, so I like the recognition that every data point represents a person, a house, or a business, and that's kind of what this community conditions survey gets at, what's happening in the low and moderate income areas of the economy. And so this is a survey of organizations that serve those communities, and we can see that we're starting for there to be good, going from kind of bad to not so good, poor conditions from an economic mobility, ability to find work, financial stability aspect, some expectations improving on finding work and job quality, but overall, just some real challenges, particularly because I showed that chart on inflation and spending. This is a segment of the economy that's really impacted by inflation when we see it, and so you can kind of see that playing out there. If you are involved in this type of work, an organization that serves low and moderate income communities, and you would be interested in participating in this survey that collects this data that I just showed. Our current survey, we run this one twice a year. The spring-summer survey is going on right now, and so if you're interested in participating in that and connecting with us through that, included the QR code here, or connect with me after. And we can get you connected to the right people. And then the rest of, I'm going to wrap up really quickly here. We do have some handouts available if you would like to learn more or have something to take with you. Sarah brought some handouts with us today. But I'll finish with just saying, from the two of the industries that are really important to the Oklahoma economy are agriculture and energy. Agriculture is actually doing, aside from really difficult crop conditions and low crop commodity prices, our farm economy is really being held up by historically high cattle prices. 50% of our farm revenues in the state come from the production of cattle. You probably see it as you're driving along the turnpike. We have a lot of pasture land, cattle, and so those are holding up relatively well. And even helping support, broader rural economies because of the strength of our ag economy relative to some other parts of our region. I would also note that on the oil and gas side, when you see energy prices, oil prices go as high as they did, there's a tendency to think, oh, well, we're likely going to see, higher employment, which we actually did in May in mining and oil and gas, and more business activity in the state. Those prices went above what our survey respondents would say would be a substantial increased price. We haven't seen, though, at least in Oklahoma, a substantial increase in production. And that's because our state tends to be a quote-unquote gassier state, where natural gas is really what kind of drives more of the activity here. And natural gas prices have really been, other than a blip because of the war, below the profitable price. So it's really that, not just oil or gas prices, but it's really the ratio between those two. As we have higher natural gas prices relative to oil prices, it tends to be when we see greater expansion. So, and then I'm going to skip just to give us time for questions. I'll end with monetary policy. The Fed held the federal funds rate steady in June. The latest projections are shown. Projections in the purple, anywhere from holding rates steady this year to reducing. And the current target range is 3.5 to 3.75. They also started purchasing short-term treasury securities, reaffirming their policy of maintaining ample reserves in the banking system. So as there have been more demand for reserves in the financial system from banks, they decided to start purchasing short-term securities again instead of just letting them roll off. So thank you for your attention, and I hope that was helpful in understanding the economy of the state and the nation, and I think I have 1 minute for questions, so yeah. Okay, or connect with me after. Okay. Okay.
District map, is there ever talk of putting Oklahoma in with Texas, and would that be a good thing for Oklahoma or a bad thing?
That's a good question. Half of Oklahoma used to be in the Dallas Fed region. When the Federal Reserve was initially established back in 1913, the bottom half of our state was with the Dallas region. And then a portion of the state was moved. There were 8 counties in the southern part of the state that held out, that wanted to be with Dallas. But then in 1984, there was a decision to keep all of Oklahoma together with the Kansas City Fed region. At that time, most of the farmers in the state, it really is due to ag, the farmers and agricultural lenders. Kansas City was more the rail hub for trading cattle and things like that, and wheat. And so that was why they lobbied to be included with the Kansas City Fed district, and Dallas, the Dallas Fed allowed them to go. So, but it's really only been since the 1980s that Oklahoma has been fully with Kansas City. And I don't see, I think, with ag, it makes more sense to be with Kansas City. Energy might make more sense to be with Dallas. So, but I don't see that changing anytime soon. So, I like that question. So thank you.
So Courtney, thank you very much. I have to admit, my knowledge of the Kansas City Federal Reserve is from an early 2000 movie with Diane Keaton, where her husband lost his job and she went to work as a janitor and came up with a scheme of how to steal the money that was getting ready to be shredded. So just a note, they did get caught, but if you haven't seen the movie, Mad Money, it's great. But so another thing I learned is the book that Jenny picked for this week, Fireworks. Courtney shared with me she's in an organization called Society of Children's Book Writers, and she pointed out that this is the Caldecott winner for illustrations. So she liked the book. And so that will be donated to our partner in education, Celia Clinton. So thank you very much for that. So upcoming programs, we have July 5th, Roger Ramsayer. July 22nd, Coach Barry Henson. July 29th is our 5th Wednesday. It'll be here at the church, a little different. It'll be brown bag lunch, committee meetings, and a service project to be announced. International projects will meet immediately after this meeting in room 231. We would also like to welcome any of our guests to please come back and join us, and we'd love to have you join our club. Oklahoma City has a great club, and your president, Lance, is a good friend of mine, but they have a lot of people, so we would really like to have you join our club since you do represent us. So we'd like to extend a sincere thanks to our Rotary sponsors for their ongoing support of our Rotary Club. Your advertising investment play a vital role in strengthening our programs and helping our club to continue to grow and thrive. We're truly grateful for your partnership and commitment to keeping Rotary strong in our community. Thank you all for joining us today in your commitment to serving others. Your dedication helps make our community stronger every day. Let's continue to create lasting impact. Meeting is adjourned.
Happy trails to